Welcome to another edition of the MYB Cast, a podcast devoted to educating our followers to alternatives for self-care and wellness through the somatic world of our mind-body connection. Today, we're featuring another episode of our series, Portraits of the Pioneers. Portraits of the Pioneers is an in-depth look at those that have been actively involved in the exploration, the development, and the practice of somatic touch therapy. Hi, I'm Richard Mack, and I'm here with my co-host, Anna Marie Bowers. And today, Anna Marie and I are honored and excited to have Bill Scholl join us for the show. Bill, welcome aboard.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you, Anna Marie. It's fun to be here.
We'd like to start with just having you tell us a little bit, Bill, about what got you started in somatic touch, what got you your story of how this evolved.
Well, I was a businessman. I had a company that was supplying houseplants to a number of different companies, including Target stores back in the early days when Target, I think, had 40 stores. We ended up with about 3,500, I think, at the end of that run. And I woke up one morning and I couldn't move my left arm, couldn't do anything with my shoulder at all. And I ran to the doctor who ran a bunch of tests and couldn't find anything in particular that was wrong with me, didn't know what it was. And so I left there and not knowing quite what to do. It didn't get any better over a period of about 2 weeks. I couldn't put on my own shirt. I had to have help dressing. And a friend of mine said, well, go see this lady. She just took a course in something and maybe she can help you. And that was all the information I had at that point in time. So I called Barbara Hewitt, who lived on Baylor Street. I don't know why I remember that, in Austin, Texas, and had her practice in the front room in her home. And I arrived and she put me on her massage table and began to do little moving kinds of things around my body, which didn't make much sense to me. And at some point, she stopped right in the solar plexus, just right below my rib cage. And she stayed there for about 20 minutes. And it felt good. And then all of a sudden, my entire shoulder girdle released. And I had no further impingement, no further pain. I was shocked. And I just said, what did you do? And she couldn't tell me in words that made any sense to me what she had done. I had no idea what it was. I just knew, well, I'm going back to see you again. And I became a client. I was there for 2 years. Just whenever she was in town and I was in town, once a week, I was on her table. And somewhere after probably 18 months, close to 2 years, I said, Barbara, doesn't matter if you're the one working or the one on the table. And she just started laughing and said, you want to learn how to do this? And within a few months, I found myself flying into the San Francisco airport. And that took me to the High Sierra Mountains in Northern California, to a little village called Satley. And outside the village, there was a small, I don't know what you would call it. I guess it was a home made out of redwood, 3 stories, very Northern California, set in the woods, lots of different kinds of trees. And as I walked up to it, there was a pond with a teepee set up next to it. And I thought, this is really nice. I was coming out of Texas in the summer months. It was June. The weather up there was fabulous. And I just wondered why anybody would live anywhere else but there. So that was the beginning feeling of what was to be my level 1 Traeger course, my beginning class in Traeger. It was a 6-day class. There were 14 students, I remember, and a number of assistants. And the second morning, the front door flies open at about 8:45. And this very loud woman, huge, overweight, gray-haired woman comes flying through the door, going, "Where the hell are we? This is out in the middle of nowhere. How did anybody even find this place?"
That's
And I went, "What have I gotten myself into?" And of course, this presence, this woman was Betty Fuller, who became my teacher, my best friend, I loved everything about Betty. We became very good friends over all the years, and she was a marvelous teacher. Betty was responsible for the Traeger approach being in the world. None of us would be sitting here talking to each other if Betty hadn't been there to do that. Um,
Bill, I just want to say you have a fondness towards Betty. We've talked about this. You were even talking about writing your book about Betty. But you're not the only one. We've done a number of these interviews, and Betty is highly respected by everybody. And
yeah,
I wouldn't mind hearing a little bit more about Betty from your perspective.
well, you have to. Betty was there at the beginning of whatever you want to call it, in the 60s and 70s, as the whole idea of touch being more than simply a trained European massage form.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, as it became more than that, Betty was there for all of that. She had been the director of the Marin County Playhouse, which was the largest theater group north of San Francisco in California. She was an actress. She was a performer. She had capacity to be in front of a group of people, and just her presence was enough to hold the group.
Mm-hmm.
So she brought those skills. She was responsible for Moshe Feldenkrais's work coming to the United States.
Wow,
She was
that's
one of his first
Fascinating.
students to
hmm.
bring his work to America, and she brought him over at some point along the way. She was at Esalen Institute at the opening of that whole New Age developmental process. Uh, she had dear friends at Esalen in those early years. Abraham Maslow is one. I can't think of the names of others at this moment in time. But there were all of those pioneers of bringing touch and movement into something more than just the specific medical world. These were
Mm-hmm.
people. They were rebels. They were interested in what all this was, what was really happening. Um, she was just a part of every bit of that, and she was up at Esalen when I talk. Let's stay with my beginning training for just a minute, because what happened to me there with her and with the group was I had been living in kind of no man's land for about 10 years. My first wife died when she was 23. I was 25. We had a year-old son, and it was a level of shock that just put me in a place where I couldn't function very well. Let me just say it that way. So I'm up here at Osher Reader's place in Satley, California, and the third morning of the training, and I can remember the moment and the detail totally. I was taking a shower. I could describe the shower stall to you in her home. And I stood up tall in the shower and I thought to myself, I like me.
Aw.
And that was a life-changing moment for me. And it came from the work of Milton Traeger, which is an acceptance of what is in your hands at the moment on the table. No need to be in judgment of what you're feeling, no need to do anything with it except be with it. It's not something that needs fixing. It's not a responsibility to change it. It's just be with it in a level of acceptance that was new to me. I'd never had that experience before.
Mhm.
And that moment, standing in this shower stall in the high Sierra Mountains in California, changed my life. That was the point at which I knew at that moment I would do this stuff forever, for the rest of my life.
Oh. Could you describe the first time you met Milton and what that was like for you?
Sure. So I do this class with Betty, and I'm having a wonderful time. I went home. I said, I told Betty I want to be in a class with Milton. And she said he has a training in California in 30 days. In order to be in that class, you have to give 30 sessions. So I said, okay. So I went home and I did one session a day for 30 days after work. That's the whole story. And then I got on the plane and I flew to San Francisco, found my way down to, oh gosh, Monterey area, to a place called Getting in Touch. Do you know that
Wow.
place, Anna Marie? Were you ever there?
I was never at that one, no.
Yeah, Getting in Touch was uh, this kind of usual California setting. There were little cottages all over the property for people to sleep in. There was one enormous building in the middle that housed a place to eat and the big classrooms. And then on the side of that building, there was a line of showers and just shower heads with hot and cold water and I guess a gravel base underneath, smooth stones, so you could stand on them. But there were no partitions between the showers and they were open to the world on the back side. So you just take off your clothes and get in the shower and wash down and scrub. So I'm in there taking my shower in the morning. And next to me under the next shower head is this little man, gray hair. And he turns to me and holds out his hand and says, "Hi, I'm Milton Traeger." And that's how I met Milton. I said, "Well, I'm going to be in your class." And we had a nice little conversation, these two naked guys standing under the showers there right at the place. It was, and then I'm in the training with Milton after that.
What an intimate introduction to
It
your
was, it was a long way from growing up in this little village in South Louisiana. I tell you, it was a nice shift, but it felt very normal. So, you know, my beginnings in the work, uh, Milton was learning to teach. He'd only been teaching for a few years at that point, maybe 4 or 5 years. And, he was this old guy. He was never saw himself as being a teacher in a group setting like that. He certainly was that one-to-one with his patients, but he never saw that. And over the years, he got better and better at it. I mean, he really became his capacity to listen was more and more highly developed. But somehow that didn't matter. He could be gruff, he could be difficult, he could be those things, especially early on, but it didn't make any difference because what he had and what he could do when he was with a patient was incredible. And it didn't I mean, his touch was incredible. That was a big part of it. But there was something more than that happening with him and his patients. And it took me many, many years to understand at all what he was doing, what he was really about. But he was able to see what was going on with somebody without being judgmental, without thinking that there was something there wrong with them that he had to fix. He
Mhm.
never had a sense that he was there to fix something. And to make that decision to fix something is to tell the person you're working with that they're screwed up. There's something wrong with them and it needs, you need me to fix it. He never had that. Never had that at all. So his approach, which I think I can do fairly well at this point, after 45 years of playing with it, I think now I'm beginning to get it. Of course, I mean that's a statement I've been making for 40 years. Now I understand what it was. Still, that never changes. I'm still trying to understand it. He was able to support people in accepting who they were, who they are. And there's a freedom that comes from that place of this is who I am. That changes everything. Everything then becomes possible. I don't have to be in self-judgment about who I am. And that's allowed me, that awareness has allowed me to be in support of my clients, my patients in ways that they want to come back. They want more of this. They don't want whatever it is. They don't even understand it usually in the beginning, but over time they begin to like themselves. It's a remarkable thing. It's a remarkable thing. It certainly changed my life. So I'm at this point in my life. I've been diagnosed about 6 months ago with cancer. And moving past the shock of that, my sense is, okay, how do I deal with this circumstance that I find myself in? Because I'm in the medical world now, and 3-4 days a week, I'm dealing with all of that. And what's clear to me, what's become clear, and it's come entirely because of my Traeger background, is we're all just people. So these doctors and nurses that I'm having to work with on a regular basis and they're seeing really sick people. It's all okay. It's all okay. So I'm seeing them as people, not as Dr. So-and-so or physiotherapist so-and-so. I'm seeing people and I want to know what they do for fun.
Yeah.
I want to know who they are and what floats their boat, what gets them interested in things. So I have a wonderful lady. She's my nutritional counselor. And she spends her day sitting behind a computer going, and what did you have for dinner last night? And typing it in. And what did you have for a snack? And typing it in. And I'm watching this and going, wow, that's a day, all day long. And I looked at her and I said, what do you do for fun? And she looked at me. I said, when you're not sitting here typing in what people are eating, what do you do for fun in your life? And she kind of sat up real straight. She smiled and she said, I'm a professional flamenco dancer. And now we're off and running because that's interesting. That's a whole lot more interesting than what Bill had for his snack yesterday.
Sure.
She was late for her next patient because I just wanted to, anyway, she's going to let me know when she has a performance in and around where we live, and we'll go see her perform. So now every time I show up for anything, not to see her, she shows up to see how I am, and we talk a little bit. And so there's this, I think that's at the heart of whatever these forms we do is. I think that quality of connection with people is everything. Yeah, we all have some skills. Yeah, we can see some things that maybe our client doesn't see, and we can support them in feeling, seeing, being with, accepting, whatever those kinds of words we want to use are. But in the end, we're just two people trying to figure out how to get through this life in a way that makes us happy, that keeps us real along the way. And other than that, so
Well, Bill, I have to say that is so you. I mean, the inquisitive, using your natural instincts and in your loving way, just diving into a conversation. That's beautiful.
I'm in my heart of hearts, Richard, in my soul, I am deeply introverted.
Mm.
I grew up in a family of outrageous extroverts. And I just sat on the sofa in the corner with my book and watched the parade go by. That was my childhood.
Mhm.
So for me, this whole moving into this field of somatics to study with Milton, to study with Betty. Yeah, I never thought about it. I just wonder if Betty was really an extrovert. Anna Marie,
Ah,
I think that's an interesting question. I've never thought about it before because she was out there, but I don't know that she was any of
yeah.
that.
Very good question.
That
Very good
is,
question.
yeah, I
Yeah.
never thought about it.
Mm.
Uh, so, I think everything we do in these fields is just a means of self-expression.
Mm.
It's how are we in the world? How do we see the world? How do we see our place in the world? How do we see our place in terms of working with other people?
Mm. Mm.
That's
I
really
tend to
powerful.
I tend to avoid experts.
Yeah, yeah.
I'd rather be with a person who will explore with me.
Mm.
And Milton had that capacity. Milton Traeger had that capacity to be with someone. I think most of his best work was not done at the table with the client, with the patient. And I saw it over and over again in classes. He would work with somebody for a while and then he would take them off to the side and they would go sit and talk to each other. Class might have a break, maybe another teacher would take over and everybody was working, and he would take that person over and they'd sit and talk for 15, 20 minutes. And then they would have come to some kind of an understanding. You could see that person stand and be quite different than they were when they began that conversation.
Yes.
He could see people and he could support people in seeing and feeling themselves. And then, what they did with it, they did with it.
Don't you think a lot of that just was his innate, truly authentic curiosity about life? The same as what you're talking about, that aha
I
moment for
think I
you.
think that's absolutely true.
Yeah.
I think, you know, here's a guy who was a street kid. He was just a street kid. We can talk more about him. I mean, we could talk about Milton for hours, but he found his way. He found his way. And he supported many of us in finding something out about ourselves we didn't know.
And accepting ourselves in
Yeah.
many, many ways. That here's what is. It's just what is.
And as he pointed those things out to many of us, me included, it really pissed me off because I didn't want to see it. I didn't want to look at it. He really could hone right to the point. He didn't mess around. He didn't, he was right there with it. And I can do that better now. I'm always a little nervous when I go there with a client. Sometimes it feels like it's the right thing to do with the patient
Sure.
to really speak the truth to what I see.
Sure.
So far, I haven't had anybody run screaming out the door. It seems to work.
Well, I guess after 45 years of doing this, that's saying a lot.
How
I
did you
can,
end up?
I
Sorry,
just, I
go ahead.
want to,
Go
I
ahead.
just riffing off what you're saying, Richard. I remember Milton one time going up to one of his longtime instructors And he put his arm around her shoulder and he leaned in and he said, "Don't worry, someday you're going to get this." And I thought, okay, there we are. There we are. You had a question, Anna Marie?
Yeah, I was going to say from beginning exploration for yourself and your beginning awareness of yourself and working with your clients, can you talk just a little bit about how that evolved into you feeling like you wanted to teach?
Well, I've always been a teacher my whole life. I, you know, when I went off to summer camp when I was 13 years old, and that's really what the book I'm writing is about, the beginning of it. And I met my two best friends in the world there, one whom became the longest serving rabbi in the United States. He was 35 years in one congregation. And the other who became a country and Western musician. You probably know the name Kinky Friedman and Kinky Friedman and the Texas Jew Boys. They're both gone now. Kinky just has been gone a few months. Jimmy a couple of years now.
Mm.
But we went to camp together, and then I was a junior counselor and then a counselor, and then a senior, and running departments of the camp for years. So I'd always been teaching. And then I kept from going to Vietnam by being a school teacher for a year. I had no education courses. That's a whole story in and of itself. But I taught school for a while. So teaching was, something I was very comfortable being in front of people and doing that kind of stuff. And to become a Traeger instructor I just thought after a few years, this is something I'd like to do. And I understood the political implications of that within the Traeger organization very early on, long before I thought about teaching. So I wrote Betty Fuller a letter and I said, I'd like to teach the work. I know I'm not ready. I know I have a lot to learn. And my only question is that possible at some point in time? If I manage to get through, whatever hoops I need to get through to do it. So I basically gave her no option but to say yes. I wrote the thing in a way that she couldn't tell me no. And then I would say, okay, well, what should I do? And then I would get a letter from the instructor group saying, well, do this, this, and this. And then about 6 months, a year later, I'd write back and I said, here's what I did, but you asked me to do. Here's what I learned from it. What should I do now? And so I never put up a push. I always put up an open position. And eventually they couldn't think of anything else I should go do. So they
Brilliant.
made me an instructor. And I was terrible. It took me a long time to learn to teach the work. And but Betty was always there. She was very generous. I could go to any class she was teaching anywhere in the world. Just tell her I'm coming. I didn't have to ever ask even. And I did that. I traveled the world with Betty and with several other instructors as well, but particularly with Betty.
Mm.
And I learned a lot along the way from her. And she was a pretty good teacher.
Wow.
More so than Milton in terms of teaching. But that's what we did. And I don't know, it was kind of like the Wild West in those days in terms of teaching bodywork forms and what people wanted to learn. And, everybody had these ideas, and some of the things people were teaching were just god awful, terrible,
Sure,
even painful. And
sure.
some of the things people were teaching were very interesting and very, and everybody was learning, everybody teaching, and it didn't matter the form. Everybody was learning how to get across, how to find the essence of what they were teaching and how to do it. And it was great. I mean, I was at Esalen a few times. I wasn't one of those guys who was there from the beginning right on through. And that was really the Wild West, to be
Sure.
literally the Wild West. But Texas had its charm as well back in those days.
Well, this is a great place to take a pause. We're
Okay.
going to have another episode following next week, and I'm going to talk to Bill a little bit more about from those humble beginnings, how this blossomed into a beautiful flower. I'm an example of one of his students in a number of classes, and I have to say that he did become quite the teacher, and I honor him as one of my most honored teachers. So we'll talk more about that next week. So in the meantime, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Be well.